We once thought humanity was weak, savage, emotional, unworthy of surviving in the galaxy, until we discovered the warship Indomitably an armored nightmare, not built merely to fight, but to endure against something far worse than war. It bore no flag, carried no conquest mission. It simply drifted through darkness, waiting for something to awaken. And then, the real darkness came. From the edge of the universe, from where light itself could not reach, they surged forth. No words, no hesitation, no death. Erebus, the devourer of the stars' memories. And humanity was the only one ready. When the last light remains, it is humanity. Prepare for the greatest survival battle in galactic history. First contact. Space lay silent like an uncut black cloth, cold, infinite, and untouched. The Verian scout ship Vortex Wing drifted quietly through the void of the Oslari Belta restricted zone, far from trade routes and allegedly devoid of life. Or so they had once believed. From the main observation deck, the stars stretched into streaks of light as the sensor array swept through the surrounding sectors. High Captain Zortha, towering reptilian figure with metallic gray skin and burning golden, Aya stood with arms folded, silently observing. For 80 years, the Verian Dominion had secretly monitored humanity, a savage species on a blue planet clinging to the edge of the galaxy. They had watched humans destroy themselves, then rebuild, then wage war again as if they had been born for battle. Nothing remarkable, a nearby officer grunted. They still rely on bullets, energy cannons, and nukes. Primitive. Zorth didn't reply. He had once thought the same, but something today felt wrong. The ship's alert systems had just picked up a mass anomaly, an enormous object drifting in space, only a few 100,000 kilometers away. Magnify the image, Zorth commanded. The central screen flickered to life, displaying the shape of a vessel, but not like anything they had seen before. Its hull was long and asymmetrical, armored like a planetary fortress, and devoid of any markings from known galactic factions. Its surface was pitted and scarred, as if it had endured a war across the stars, yet it remained motionless, silent. "What ship is that?" one officer gasped. "No idea," Zorth murmured, "but it's looking at us." Suddenly, the sensors spiked. The scanners detected waves of return signals emanating from the unknown ship. The energy patterns weren't cyclical, they pulsed like a heartbeat. A crimson warning light flared to life. "Sir, the ship is scanning us. It has active sensors. But the way it's doing it, it's like it's smelling us," the officer said, voice trembling. Zorth frowned. No known species had ever detected a Verian scout ship while cloaked. Even the Zoramasters of refractive light technologies could only trace fragments. But this ship, in complete stillness, had sniffed them out? "We've got a preliminary structural analysis," another voice cut in. "It doesn't follow any recognized warship design. No visible habitation modules, no heat dispersal fins. Instead, it's fully sealed with an unidentified alloy possibly resistant to planet-killer energy levels." Zorth no longer had any doubt. This wasn't a ship. It was a declaration of war, forged in steel and hurled into the face of any who dared oppose it. Then the screen flashed. "Terran warship, Indomitable, target identified. Please declare approach intent. Warning, you are trespassing in strategic airspace. All weapon systems armed. Defensive mode active." The silence that followed was heavier than any threat. No one aboard the Vortex Wing had ever imagined a day would come when humans not only detected them, but targeted them first. "Cease all active scans, cut communications, disarm weapons," Zorth growled. "And if they still attack?" an officer asked quietly. Zorth stared at the massive shadow outside the viewport, an object that wasn't just a vessel, but a geometric nightmare, and replied, "Then we won't get a chance to fight back." The universe had always felt infinite, but in this dim corner of the galaxy, a truth was rewritten. Humanity was no longer a primitive species. They were the last thing a civilization would see before being erased. The nightmare made real. As the sensor data poured in, the control deck of the Vortex Wing fell into an unnatural silence. No one dared speak. Every eye was fixed on the central display, where the tactical supercomputer, the Dominion Varian's most precise artificial intelligence, was analyzing the anomaly. High Captain Zorth gripped the edge of the command rail. In his centuries of service, he had seen all manner of warships, from the Yaru dreadnoughts to the multi-dimensional battleships of the Torak Alliance. But what loomed before him now was not a warship. It was a living weapon, a mobile fortress, a nightmare forged in the void of desperation. "The outer hull isn't a conventional alloy," the technical officer said, voice trembling. "It's composed of multiple layersome that dissipate plasma, others that absorb nuclear energy. We have nothing that can penetrate that armor." A chill ran down Zorth's spine. "What about its weaponry?" he asked, eyes locked on the tactical schematic. "Sir, it has over 40 planetary-class railguns, distributed across the hull, each oriented to cover every possible vector of space. Estimated firing speed, nearly the speed of light. One salvo could punch through a legacy dreadnought in under 2 seconds." "Go on," Zorth commanded. Beneath the main structure are auxiliary reactors, each linked to high-energy plasma lances. Those weapons were banned by the Galactic Council due to their mass-destructive potential. But the Terrans, they've made them standard issue. And missile systems? One launcher bay holds over 3 strategic warheads each, one equipped with local space-folding technology. They don't explode, they bend reality, crushing all matter within the blast radius into molecular dust. Shields? Irrelevant. But it wasn't the conventional armaments that left Zorth breathless. It was the subsystems. "There's an internal drone bay," the officer continued, swallowing hard, "designed for boarding operations. These drones aren't powered by energy cores. They use monomolecular blades. They can slip through the smallest crevice, seek out every crew member, and finish the job." Zorth felt a ripple of dread spread across the bridge. "And there's more," the officer whispered. "There are units called Exo, troopers, fallen soldiers reprogrammed and cybernetically enhanced. A single one carries the firepower of a fortress. Their sole directive: terminate all biological life, regardless of where it hides." Zorth stood motionless, his heartbeat pounding so loudly it felt as though it would crack his armor. In the long history of Dominion Verian expansion, they had dismantled countless civilizations, crippling them from within, with masterful tactics and superior technology. But humans, they didn't build weapons to conquer. They built them to survive, to endure, even if it meant becoming monsters. "We were wrong," Zorth thought grimly. Humans didn't evolve to adapt to the galaxy. They forced the galaxy to adapt to their madness. Suddenly, a cold transmission cut across the channel void of tone, devoid of mercy. "Verian vessel, your strategic scans have been logged. Any further actions will be deemed hostile. This ultimatum will not be repeated." It wasn't a threat. It was a sentence. Zorth motioned to cut all signals. The space outside remained quiet, but inside him, a storm raged. If this was just one ship, how many more stood behind it? And if this was their defensive response, what exactly were humans afraid of? "Prepare a message to Home Command," Zorth said quietly. His voice dropped, weighted by a time-worn dread. "Just one message. We have awakened something that was never meant to rise. The truth behind endurance." Space remained silent, but inside the command deck of the Vortex Wing, that silence had transformed into a kind of sound. Thick, suffocating, sharp as a blade. Every officer on board felt it in their bone. Something was about to happen, and it would not end in peace. High Captain Zorth still stood motionless, his gaze locked onto the indomitable, massive, expressionless construct of metal, still and inert, yet alive. It looked less like a ship, and more like some ancient beast feigning sleep, luring its prey closer with false serenity. Then, without warning, a pale shimmer of light pulsed across the Indomitable's hull. It was not a weapon, not a signal of war. It was a voice. "Unidentified vessel, this is Terran warship Indomitable. You have breached strategic airspace, Class 0. Your scanning behavior is classified as a strategic threat. Declare your purpose immediately." The voice echoed across the void like a transmission from an electronic tomb. Cold, metallic, emotionless, but unmistakable. It was human. Zorth raised a hand ordering no change to their cloaked position. Then he turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel. No hostility, no threats. Every word must be humble." A sharp click filled the air as the line opened. Zorth inhaled slowly, pressing down the ridged bone frills along his neck, a cultural gesture of calm among his kind. Then he spoke, "This is High Captain Zorth of the Royan Survey Fleet. We harbor no hostile intent. We are observers only, as we have been with many civilizations before." A silence followed. It stretched, suffocating. Then the voice returned, this time tinged with thinly veiled contempt. "Observers? Let me guess you thought we wouldn't notice. Thought your cheap cloaking fields could outmatch us?" It was a slap to the face of Verian pride, a blow to a military ego carved from millennia of conquest. Zorth swallowed his fury. "We did not anticipate that your technology had advanced to such a degree," he said carefully, forcing composure into every syllable. At once, the sensor readouts exploded. Indomitable was powering up its weapon systems. Not just one, but over 30 distinct systems locking onto the Vortex wing in perfect synchronization. From hypersonic railguns to high-energy plasma cannons. From spatial warping missiles to unidentified directed energy arrays. The entire suite of Terran armaments was now aimed directly at the Verian ship. Every officer on deck knew, if they fired, no one aboard would survive. "Sir," one officer choked out, "they've calculated our evasive trajectories. All of them. Every algorithm in our strategic system has been countered." Zorth gripped the edge of the console, claws tightening. "This isn't strategy," he said. "This is a lesson. They're not afraid of us. They're teaching us to be afraid of them." Then the voice came back one last timeno, longer, cold, but mocking, like a phantom whisper in a tomb. "Advice: pick a different civilization to spy on. We don't enjoy being watched. And next time, remember who controls this region." The transmission cut. Final, absolute. No lasers were fired. No missiles launched. And yet, in that moment, the mighty Dominion Verian who once believed themselves the masters of galactic warfare lowered their heads. Zorth let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Initiate a warp jump. We're leaving," he said quietly. "What should I report to High Command?" the communications officer asked. Zorth gave one last glance at the Indomitable, still motionless, still looming like a silent god forged in iron, and replied, "Report this. We are never, ever to provoke humanity again." The Vortex wing vanished into the folds of hyperspace, leaving behind the armored monstrosity, a beast that hadn't fired a single shot, yet had made an entire empire tremble at the edge of extinction. But Zorth knew. Deep in the instincts honed by centuries of military service, he knew one thing with dreadful certainty. This wasn't humanity at their peak. This was just their introduction. A warning too late. As the light of the warp jump faded, the Vortex wing emerged on the outermost orbit of Verian's capital world, Zal-Torath, the black jewel spinning between its twin suns. On any other return, Zorth would have felt pride swelling in his chest. The towering command spires like blades piercing the heavens, spiral fortresses cloaked in deathly chrome, and the emblem of Worth's shattered shield of the Verian Dominion, etched in molten steel across the military square's walls. But this time, pride had become a burden. Zorth stepped off the docking ramp with unsteady legs. The honor guards flanking the entrance stood silent, but their gazes held the unmistakable glint of suspicion. Few commanders were summoned to the High War Council, and when they were, it was never for good news. He passed through the arching corridor into the deep data tower place, reserved solely for those entrusted with survival-level military clearance. Within the vast cylindrical chamber, light from the data core shimmered across 13 grim faces. The supreme warlords, each one a titan of strategic conquest, the keepers of the Dominion's future. At the center sat Grand Warlord Torval, older than some stars, his body a tapestry of war scars, his yellow eyes deeper than any gravity well. He stared at Zorth without blinking. "What did you see?" Torval's voice rumbled dry and ancient, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the soil. Zorth stood tall, though his hand behind his back trembled. "I bring bad news, gravely bad." With a command, Zorth activated the projection. A 3D image of the Indomitable sprang to life in the center of the room, rotating slowly, each gun port, each armored seam, each radiation signature rendered in brutal detail. Silence fell like a blade. "This is a human warship," Zorth said, voice steady. "Just one, but its combat capacity eclipses every dreadnought we have. Nuclear-resistant armor, space-warping missiles, boarding drones that kill crews before the ship is even breached." A quiet murmur broke the air. "You're comparing it to our Class 9 super battleship?" One warlord sneered. "No," Zorth answered, never taking his eyes off the projection. "I'm saying it surpasses it." Torval's eyes narrowed. "Are you claiming that a single human ship could destroy our entire fleet?" Zorth nodded. Some warlords scoffed. Others frowned in silence. But Warlord Verian, famous for his aggression, stood, fists clenched. "Absurd," he roared. "Humans are a half-feral species. They left their atmosphere barely centuries ago. Their technology is—" "Then explain this," Zorth cut in, his voice low but sharp. "How did they detect us through a third-tier cloaking field? How did they lock every strategic vector before we even realized we were compromised?" Veer fell silent. Zorth approached the holoscreen, pointing at the tactical overlay. "They didn't fire. They let us leave. Not because they couldn't destroy us, but because they didn't need to. And that is what makes them the most dangerous." Torval folded his arms, gaze sharp. "You're saying humans are not only powerful but disciplined?" "Yes," Zorth replied. "They're not savage, not reckless. They're waiting. And what they're waiting for isn't us." The chamber went still. Zorth looked around at the gathered warlords, each one now silent in contemplation. They are not building weapons to invade. They are building to defend against something. Something older than us. Something not bound to any star system. And for the first time in thousands of galactic cycles, the Supreme War Council ended without a single order being issued. No mobilization, no threats, no denials. Because for the first time in the history of the Verian Dominion, they didn't know what they were up against. From war to nightmare, Zorth didn't return to his barracks. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He no longer cared for the rituals of the warrior caste. He had lived through 2 galactic wars, personally dismantled 3 civilizations through tactical genius and merciless firepower, but never had he felt so lost. Not because he was weak, but because everything he had, believed everything he had taught, his officers had become meaningless. In the deep intelligence chamber, Zorth drowned himself in thousands of reports about humanity-dismissed briefings, overlooked transmissions, warning signals once labeled as misinformation. Most unsettling were the strange inconsistencies in how humans operated within the galaxy. And then it struck him like a fracture through the ice of military logic. Humanity had stopped expanding. Typically, every emerging civilization followed the same arc's expansion: conquest, resource exploitation, and further expansion. It was nature's pattern. Survival through control, power through accumulation. But the humans, they had broken the cycle. Their space stations were not positioned on the frontier but recessed, deep within secured zones. Their outer outposts were not invasion platforms but defensive bastions. Their planets were surrounded by multi-layered shielding, orbital weapons platforms, sensor grid sand beneath them, colossal shipyards building warcraft in bulk. No invasions, no occupations, no threatening broadcasts, no interstellar diplomacy, just silence and construction. Zorth whispered, barely hearing his own voice. "They're not preparing to attack us. They're preparing to defend against something else." A blinking alert. A top-level encrypted file from the Verian intelligence net had just arrived. Zorth opened ITAN, his heart clenched. It displayed a region unmarked on any standard galactic chart. A swath of dark void, beyond shipping lanes, beyond even dead stars. Previously classified as strategically worthless dead zone, but the footage told a different story. Deep space sensors had detected wreckage massive warship remnants, larger than anything ever built in recorded history. The hulls bore no emblems, no registration, no known species markings from the Galactic Alliance database. Twisted structures, alien alloys. Some fragments still emitted faint energy signature ISAs, if, at some point, they had been alive. Zorth felt his blood run as cold as argon frost. But the worst had not yet come. At the bottom of the file was an attached intelligence analysis, accompanied by one grim conclusion. Many points of impact do not match conventional weaponry. Some hulls appear torn from within. Others show armor that has been dissolved. Signs of non-physical phenomena detect. Analysis suggests the attacking entity does not originate from known galactic sectors. Zorth shot to his feet. If this was what remained, then whatever had created that destruction was still out there, alive, moving. He walked directly to the strategy tower. Grand Warlord Torval greeted him with a stare of cold iron. "You have news?" Zorth nodded and tossed the file onto the council table. "We were wrong. Humans aren't defending against us. They're trying to survive something that already annihilated that sector of space." Torval opened the data file, the hollow projection lighting up his scarred, time-worn face. Zorth continued, each word carving through centuries of pride like a blade. The Indomitable was not built to conquer. It was built to endure, to remain standing when everything else had been erased. The room fell into silence. For the first time, Torval didn't argue. He didn't bark orders. He didn't scoff. He asked only one question, soft, but razor sharp. "What do you think we're facing?" Zorth closed his eyes. "An ancient nightmare, and humanity is the first species to awaken while it begins to stir." The predator in the dark. Inside the high-security intelligence command center, soft violet light pulsed from hundreds of data cores suspended like synthetic stars. Zorth stood before a command interface, his hand gliding through dense streams of encrypted information. What he uncovered made the back of his neck crawl, not because of what was known, but because of what no one dared to record. One report stood out, triple encrypted, marked "Do Not Release," and titled simply, "Arabus, Unknown Variable." Zorth opened it. Data extraction initiated. Source: Perimeter Surveillance Outpost. Eric's Vale. Incident: loss of 3 consecutive exploration teams. No distress signals received. 1 week later, a Terran unmanned scout ship entered the blackout zone. Result: detection of an unknown energy, field-localized reality distortion. Weak biological signals found unmatched by any known genetic database. Zorth swallowed hard. Then the footage played. From the scout's visual feed, a sector of space appeared as though a chunk of the cosmos had been bitten off. Floating motes of twisted light spiraled around a core of jet-black matter like the gutted corpse of a star. The camera jolted. Light flared, then went dark, and in that moment of silence, it emerged. A colossal form shaped like a warship, but pulsing with the rhythm of a living heart. Twisted metal appendages extended from its hull, each branch unraveling into hundreds of drifting biofragments, bones, exoskeleton shards, living armor, plating harvested from dozens of species. It was a macabre collection of death, orbiting a singular monstrosity. Zorth took a step back. That thing was not a ship, not a creature, not AI. It was all of them, and none of them. There was no match in the galactic archives. No database had a name, no species had laid claim. Beneath the footage was a Terran tactical annotation. Subject responds instantly to sensor pulses. All energy beams are bent or absorbed. Physical weaponry decays on contact. No fixed structural vulnerabilities. Recommendation: do not approach. Do not engage. Do not disseminate false information. Tactical designation code: Arabus. Provisional identifier. Zorth exhaled shakily. This was what humanity had seen. This had turned hundreds of warships into cosmic dust. This had forced the most war-driven species in the known galaxy to build walls instead of fleets. And worse, it was still alive. Below the video was a Terran energy displacement, Maprid lines tracing slow, eerie movements of similar energy signatures. They weren't penetrating deeper, but they were encircling the galaxy's edge. Zorth's body felt compressed under the weight of the unthinkable. These things weren't conquering for power. They didn't negotiate. They waited. They were patient, cold, hungry, not out of rage, but because that's what they were. "We're being hunted," Zorth whispered, "by something the universe itself has tried to forget." Hours later, Zorth entered the strategic chamber. Grand Warlord Torval awaited him. No guards, no council, just 2 figures who once believed themselves masters of destiny. "What did you find?" Torval asked, voice deep and thunderous. Zorth placed the data device on the table. This isn't a conventional war. This is a survival campaign against an ancient extinction. He locked eyes with Torval, whose embers burned low in his tired stare. Humans are not the threat. They are the final line of defense, and they're struggling to keep the gates of hell from opening. Torval said nothing for a long while. Then, finally, he nodded. Then there is one thing we must do, he said. Send them an invitation to speak, not for alliance, but for co-survival. A warning in the void. There was no diplomatic ceremony, no banners, no insignias, no interstellar press conferences. When humanity wished to speak, they didn't send an invitation. They opened a channel and waited to see who had the courage to answer. The communication from the Terran warship Indomitable bypassed all standard Dominion relay stations and streamed directly into the Verian Dominion's most classified tactical network. A deep-level encryption string appeared, one that could only be decrypted with Zorth's personal biometric signature. The message was simple. If you want the truth, come. But understand once you know, you cannot go back. Zorth did not hesitate. 3 hours later, the Sovereign Whisper, a diplomatic-class vessel coated in the Dominion's golden insignia, departed from Zaltarath's orbit. It glided silently through uncharted spatial corridors known only to the highest-ranking commanders. No escorts, no weapons. Alone for a truth no one else had dared to face. When the warp jump concluded, Zorth was deep inside Terran territory in a star system absent from any known galactic map. Ahead of him floated the Indomitable, the same warship that had once rendered him speechless in silent dread. This time, it did not lock weapons. It did not issue warnings. It simply opened an energy corridor passage, leading directly into a reception chamber within its armored core. Zorth stepped aboard. No soldiers. No weapons aimed at his head. Only Captain Elias Grant, standing in a softly lit chamber, clad in silver-black tactical armor. His deep blue eyes held the quiet fire of a man who had seen the Indan live to whisper about it. "Welcome to reality," Grant said. His tone held no mockery, but there was no patience left either. Zorth gave a slight nod. "I didn't come out of curiosity. I came because I need to know." Grant gestured toward the central console. With a simple touch, the chamber transformed into a 360-degree starfield, full holographic recreation of Arx Vale, where the catastrophe had begun. One by one, stars vanished. Warships appeared then were torn apart. Then it came. A mass of biomechanical darkness drifted into view, pulling behind it hundreds of malformed creatures, once human, once alien, once living. Now repurposed. Now fused into an abominable design of death and consumption. "We call them Erebus," Grant said. "They don't communicate. They don't negotiate. They don't want anything except to exist and to turn everything else into versions of themselves." Zorth clenched his fists. "This is why you stopped expanding." Grant nodded. "We thought we were at our peak. We'd emerged from our civil wars, conquered our solar tensions. We believed we were ready for the stars. Then we met them. We lost an entire fleet just trying to retreat. 1,000 warships. Over 100,000 lives. Gone." Zorth stared into Grant's eyes. "And since then, you chose silence." "We didn't believe the galaxy would believe us," Grant replied slowly. "You were too busy fighting border skirmishes, claiming unclaimed voids. If we told the truth either, you'd laugh in our faces, or you'd fire everything you had at a thing you don't understand. And die faster." Zorth exhaled. "So you built walls." "No," Grant corrected. "We built fortresses, because we don't know how long we have before they breach the edges. But we know they're coming. They don't stop. They don't sleep. They only need to know we exist. And then they arrive." An image appeared. A creature taller than any war tower. Its body wrapped in molten metal. Its pulse-warped gravity itself. It had no eyes, but it sensed life, and it moved toward it. Zorth stood silent. This was no war between species. This was a war between life and an ancient, devouring dark. Grant looked him in the eye. "You can return. Report whatever you like. But if you stay, if you stand with us, understand this. We will not win this war by old means. We can only survive together." Zorth nodded, not because he trusted humanity, but because he knew choice was no longer part of the equation. The final choice. There were no trumpets, no declarations of peace. When Zorth departed the Indomitable, no one came to see him off, and he needed no farewell. He carried with him a truth as cold as the vacuum of space. Humanity does not threaten, they warn. And this time, he understood the warning was meant for all of existence. Zorth's diplomatic vessel cut through space like a blade carving through night. Unrelenting, unyielding. By the time it descended onto the inner tarmac of Zaltorath, the twin suns still bathed the sky in flames, but inside the Dominion's strategic hall, the light had lost all color of hope. The Dominion War Council convened an emergency summit. For the first time in millennia, every warlord was present. No one arrived late. No one dared show indifference. Zorth entered. He did not bow. He did not break. But the fire in his eyes had dimmed. He no longer walked as a conqueror, but as a survivor, carrying a message from the edge of extinction. Before him stood Grand Warlord Torvalancian, as frozen stone, cold as the lifeblood of dead stars. He gestured, "Speak." Zorth did not bring charts or projections. No data visuals, no tactical summaries. He only spoke, his voice rough, like burnt ash, describing what he had witnessed. He spoke of the Indomitable, of the monstrous wrecks drifting within Eric's veil, of the creatures that had once been humans, once aliens, once soldiers, now repurposed limbs of a genocidal entity older than memory, of the hunger without name what the Terrans called Erebus, though none truly knew its origin. He ended with one sentence. This is no longer a question of victory or defeat. It is survival or consumption. The chamber fell silent. Then a warlord slammed a fist on the war table. You expect us to trust humanity? They were once the greatest threat to the western sectors. Zorth couldn't hold back. His voice exploded through the stone walls. I once despised them. I believed them beasts, snarling for power. But I stood before them not as they invaded, but as they defended, like hunted animals backed into a final corner. And I swear by every star in this cursed sky, we have never faced anything like Erebus. He pointed toward the warlord, still sitting in stunned silence. You think the Dominion can hold alone? Even if we summon every fleet, stack the void with plasma cannons, we will still fall. Not because we are weak, but because we do not know how to fight the dark. Grand Warlord Torval rose. His gaze swept across the chamber sharp as broken crystal. None dared speak. You have evidence? He asked coldly. Zorth nodded. All of it. Tactical scans, energy models, sensor logs, verified footage, and a proposal from the Terrans, a survival alliance. No demands, no claims of dominance. Only one request. Prepare together. Another warlord muttered, They're begging us out of fear? Zorth stared him down. No, they fear enough to build an entire civilization around defense. And they know if we fall, they fall next. They don't need to beg. They've already warned us. And this time, I'm listening. Torval said nothing. Then he turned and approached the planetary command orb, the Dominion's doomsday communication node. He activated the interstellar relay, summoned the leaders of all Galactic Alliance species. Mark this as a black level emergency. Operation Eclipse. Status: Extinction Threshold. He turned to Zorth. You will be our messenger. And if they do not believe you? Zorth gave a faint smile, the first in weeks of haunted silence. Then I will make them believe, by any means necessary. As he left the chamber, Zorth looked up at the blood-streaked sky. For the first time in Royan history, a war was coming not for honor nor for conquest, but for raw survival. And he knew this war would not begin with a first strike. It would begin with a final whisper, the final alliance. 5 years had passed since Zorth returned from the Indomitable. 5 years an instant in the language of stars, but an eternity in the minds of billions. 5 years that changed destinies. Thousands of conferences had been held. Millions of questions had been asked. And though skepticism lingered in the air, fear, the final piece of the puzzle that humanity had swallowed long ago, finally spread across the Milky Way. Zorth had journeyed far, to the frozen worlds of the Zori, the atmospheric capitals of the Talari, the mobile sky stations of the Maran. Everywhere he went, he repeated the same truth. You don't have to believe me, but look at how humanity builds. They leave no gaps. They do not construct empires. They erect markers' final sentinels before the abyss. They do not wait to conquer. They wait for the final battle. Not everyone believed him, but no one dared to ignore him. The day arrived during the third orbital season of the neutral world Dorat Prime. There, over 2-0 warships from 37 species gathered in synchronized orbit, a shimmering belt of living steel that encircled the planet like a solemn vow. No salutes, no ceremonial fire, and yet everyone understood what was happening. The Galactic Alliancea concept, once relegated to speculative doctrine, had become real. At the center of the formation, like the heart of a vast armored organism, the warship Indomitable rotated in silence, no different than the day Zorth first laid eyes on it. Still a fortress, still a wall, still the fracture between logic and fear. But this time, it was no longer alone. Surrounding it were ships of every shape and heritage. The geometric dreadnoughts of the Verian, the inverted crescent warships of the Zori, the winged organic vessels of the Selnari, and hundreds of hulls once forged in hatred, now unified under a single gravitational truth: survival. In the command deck of the newly christened battleship Resolute Wrath, Zorth stood beside Captain Elias Grant. Neither wore ceremonial attire. No crowns, no medals, only armor, war gear, purpose. I still can't believe this is real, Zorth murmured, his eyes scanning the gleaming ocean of metal beyond the viewport. Grant didn't look at him. We're not here to believe. We're here to be ready. Silence passed between them. Then Grant activated the tactical screen. On the eastern edge of the star map, a dark blot pulsed. They've arrived, Grant said quietly. First signals at the Eric's Vale border. Zorth nodded. No attack, no message, just approaching, like mist. Grant exhaled slowly. They don't declare war. They start deleting. Below them, the Talari warship Judgment broke formation, casting a pale defense screen across the orbital line. It was followed by the Blade of Moran, the Wormcaller, Sky Maw, and the Emissary of Final Suns. One by one, the Armada activated layered defense systems. Zorth could feel the hum beneath his boots. This was no longer preparation. This was the beginning. I once believed the Dominion was the pinnacle of warfare, Zorth said, never taking his eyes off the data feed. That strategy was the ultimate weapon, but strategy never taught me this. What did? Grant asked. Zorth tightened his jaw. Terror. Terror might be the strongest glue that binds civilizations. Both men fell silent. Ahead, the dark zone began to rupture. Space twisted. And then they came. Forms without logic. Shapes without definition, beasts and machines fused in blasphemous harmony. They surged from the abyss with corrupted hulls, decay, weeping metal, and glowing red eyes that weren't eyes at all, but hunger-given form. Plates opened, limbs emerged. Human bones fused into iron appendages, screaming silently into the void. Alarms blared across every bridge. Zorth clenched his fists. No retreat, no diplomacy. Today, the galaxy fights. Grant gave a single nod. And survives. If it can. War between light and darkness. The universe carries no echoes. When the spatial veil tore open, when ancient energy waves surged like tidal floods, when darkness rose like an ocean, with no shore there was no scream to be heard. Only light and shadow colliding. Not for ideals. Not for glory. But because life had nowhere left to run, at the border where artificial light met the devouring void, the fleets of the Galactic Alliance stood still, like statues of forgotten gods. The Obsidian Maw, a Verian warship, fired the first shot. A volley of massive plasma cannons roared through space, distorting the void as they tore toward the first Targeta, spiraling biomechanical entity that twisted like the gut of some cosmic serpent. The impact hit, but it did not flinch. It did not die. It twisted, evolved. Its outer layer unraveled and rewove itself, the wound reassembling as if the pain had taught it how to defy the next strike. Then, Indomitable unleashed its full arsenal. Hundreds of railguns launched spears of light at near light speed, carving through gaps between the rising tide of abominations. Some creatures shatter reddenly for smaller, swarming forms to erupt from the remains, crawling across the stars like cosmic insects toward the nearest hull. Alarms blared across the fleet. Zorth screamed through the tactical comms. All units, avoid close-range combat. They weaponized their bodies to breach hulls. Annihilate from a distant stato, not let them touch our armor. On board the Indomitable, Grant clenched his fists. Deploy reactive nanite mesh. Form magnetic disruption corridor, screed empty zones. Upon command, thousands of auxiliary ships known as Lightward Sentinels spread into arcs, casting flickering webs of unstable energy. The darkness struck the web. It writhed. It screamed. It twisted. Then it learned to avoid the web. Grant whispered, "They're learning." One creature comet long plunged through the center of the formation. Behind it, a spatial tear trailed like a wound in the fabric of reality. Light ceased within it. Sensors died. The Sky Maul was the first to fall, pulled into the breach. No one had time to react. Only crushed hull and silence remained. Then came the voice. It wasn't a transmission. It wasn't in any language. It was a whisper carried, not by sound, but through brainwaves pushed into the mind of every living soul like a shared nightmare. Your time has expired. Officers collapsed. Soldiers screamed with laughter. Some turned weapons on their own ally. Zorth immediately activated ancient Verian mind shield sand arcane defense technology, long thought obsolete. Rationality returned. But he knew this was not a war of flesh alone. It was a war of will. Grant opened a direct channel to Zorth. "They're using our fear to kill us." Zorth nodded grimly. "Not just fear. They consume willpower like beasts consume flesh." Amid the chaos, a sudden flare of light tore open around the emissary of Final Sons. The blast carved a corridor deep into the enemy ranks. A message was clear. A gap. A chance. Grant didn't hesitate. "All heavy assault ships, follow me. We can't hold this line forever. If we don't strike the core, they'll dismantle us piece by piece." Zorth responded without pause. "Then I go with you. Varians do not fight to retreat." Together, human and former enemy, they led the charge. They dove through the blackness, through waves of metallic limbs, past screams with no mouths, through distorted patches of space-time. And at the deepest point, they saw it. The heart of Erebus. It wasn't biological. Not exactly. It wasn't mechanical either. It was consciousness made manifest, spanning hundreds of kilometers, wrapped in armor forged from the memories of devoured civilizations. Each plate was a story burned, a dream erased. "That's where it all began," Grant murmured. Zorth nodded. "And maybe where it ends." The Indomitable pushed to maximum acceleration. Grant activated the final sequence, a reality-warping bomb. A Terran secret. Not an explosive, but a spatial eraser. It didn't burn. It deleted a portion of the universe's code like nothing had ever been there. "Are you certain?" Zorth asked. Grant stared at the screen. "I'm certain that if we don't, no one will get a second chance." And then he pressed the button. No flash. No shockwave. Only absence. A patch of space ceased to exist. No matter. No light. No gravity. No sound. The heart of Erebus erased. The remnants spasmed. They screamed. They retracted. And then they fled. Not in formation. Not with intent. But as parasites flushed from a burning nest, the entire fleet fell silent. A new voice rang from the command channel. "They're retreating. The neural signal has ceased." "We're still here." Zorth collapsed to the floor of the command deck, his armor slick with blood, lungs burning like beasts in vacuum. Grant leaned against the wall, eyes on the tactical display now, showing only stars. "They'll come back," he said, not as a warning, but as truth. Zorth nodded. "And next time, they'll be worse." Grant turned to him. "Then we'll be stronger, because now we possess something they never will." "What's that?" Zorth asked. Grant smiled, the weary smile of a man who lost everything but refused to fall. "Hope." And across the galactic sky, among the quiet shimmer of ships once enemies, a new era began out of conquest, but of coexistence. And in the hearts of those who survived, a vow was carved in blood. This time, light will not tremble before the dark.